Thanks everybody for coming along tonight. I know the weather hasn't been the best, but everybody here, fair play to you for turning up, because it's awful out there. Wouldn't send my dog out. Tonight, just before we start, I've just got to say that a little bit of housekeeping and health and safety. There is no scheduled fire drill. There's no fire drill planned. So fire exits are here, and obviously the entrance that you came in, use the main entrance as your exit, and on the left hand side of the car park there's a small area there. Just collect, and if you do hear a fire alarm, just make your exit that way. Toilet facilities are through the corridor for gents, and it's the third on the left hand side. For ladies, top of the stairs, and just follow to the very top and you'll find the toilet there. Now then, mobile telephones, if anybody has got mobile telephones, either please just switch them off to silent or off altogether, whichever's best for yourself. I know obviously we're all busy people, so don't not take calls, but if you can just not inconvenience anybody else by telephones ringing. Okay. And if you have any questions about what you're going to be told this evening, if you just hang on till the end of the presentation from Gary, and we'll be more than willing to answer questions for you. And we'll be here, myself, Mike Smith, and Aaron Peacock from Cousins, as well as Gary, to give you any answers to questions you might have. A little introduction to myself. My name's Don Pollen. I'm one of the directors of Cousins Energy Solutions, along with Mike Smith, who's the other director there. Aaron Peacock looks after our IT. We're qualified domestic energy assessors, so we do energy assessments and EPCs on properties. We're also qualified domestic and Green Deal advisors. Again, we can advise you on Green Deal, what it is. After the presentation, it'll probably answer the vast majority of questions that you might have. It allows us to carry out assessments on the properties and tell you what improvements that you can actually install. The idea of the Green Deal is that as landlords, tenants or homeowners, you should have no upfront costs, little or no upfront costs. So this sort of thing will be very, very interesting to the vast majority of you this evening. It's a new government initiative, Green Deal finance mechanism. It eliminates the need to pay up front for energy efficiency. Now these measures can be, or improvements as we like to call them, they can be anything from double glazing, loft, cavity insulation. I think when we first started there were currently 44 installation measures. I think now, Gary, it's probably up to 100 or so. So what I'm going to do is I'll pass you over to Gary. He's from Tauriga Energy, Gary Bell, one of the directors there, and he can give you an overview of what the Green Deal is all about. Thank you.
All right, good evening, everybody. My name is Gary Bell. I'm one of the directors and co-founders of Tauriga, along with two of the guys. Get my slides up. Richard and Tom. So those of you that are into word puzzles, you can work out where Tauriga came from. Just before as the lads are getting the slides up then. Thanks very much for the introduction, Don. I've been working in the Green Deal now for about 18 months. We started working with DEC and consulting, went through their consultation process, and we involved ourselves with the eco-funding side of things as well. We went through the pioneer workshops, and in April of this year we signed an MOU with the government to become a pioneer Green Deal provider. And about a week or two later, we signed a strategic alliance with the Travis Perkins group of companies, which allowed us to be able to deliver an end-to-end solution for the Green Deal. And I want to take you through what that end-to-end solution looks like this evening. So, what is the Green Deal? To build on what Don said earlier on, it's a new framework initiative that's been introduced by the coalition government to fundamentally address the CO2 emissions that we have set ourselves, the targets that we set ourselves back in 2007. Almost the last thing that Tony Blair did when he signed off was to agree to some quite challenging targets for CO2 emissions. Those that like facts and figures, this was 80% of 1990 levels by year 2050. And if we're going to make any impression on those targets, then we had to look at ways of addressing the energy that escapes through our buildings. 43% of all the CO2 that we emit comes from our leaky homes and non-domestic dwellings. So that without tackling that, we were never going to achieve those targets. And the Green Deal was the initiative that the coalition came up with to address that. It's due to start October 2012. For all those people that are involved in working in the Green Deal, whether you're an assessor, whether you're an installer, or a provider like ourselves, we're all going through an accreditation process, an authorization process, that will, part of which is signing the Green Deal Code of Practice and then going on to the Green Deal Register. And the Green Deal Register opens up on the 1st of October. So it really starts from then. And ECO, a funding stream which I'll talk about later on in the evening, which is taking over from some of the schemes that are currently in place that one or two of you may know about, like certain CESP, that also kicks in from the 1st of October, where that goes through the provider channel, and again, I'll talk about that later on. So although it starts on the 1st of October, because we've got, we need to start talking to the central charge database and the energy companies, and I'll talk about that in a minute, we can't actually start writing Green Deal plans until January 2013, the 14th of January, as it is. We then take 2 weeks to get our notification back from the energy company, so we can then start installing Green Deal plans from the 28th of January, and then we can start taking the money from the meter from the 1st of March. So that's the time frame. It is predicated, reliant on this unique financing mechanism. As Don said, there's no upfront cost, assuming the measures meet the golden rule, and I'll talk about the golden rule next. It is a charge on the meter, not on the individual. What that means is that when the plan goes live and the repayments come through over a set period of time, it's the meter that pays that. Obviously, you pay the meter and you sign the credit agreement. But if you move, then the Green Deal stays on the meter, and whoever moves in, they pick that charge up. And it's in a flexible arrangement up to 25 years. Clearly, we're not going to write a Green Deal plan on a boiler over 25 years if it's only got a 5-year warranty. But if we're doing some measures that like solid wall insulation or something like that, then a 25-year period for something for a measure like that would be realistic. It's for domestic and non-domestic, and those figures that we've got there, 14 million. About 85% of the housing stock that we've currently got will be around in 2050. So that equates to about 14 million properties that we've got to go at, and about 2 million non-domestic buildings. And that's, when we go and talk to the local authorities about their housing stock, it's important that we're also able to talk about the civic centre, the town hall, and some of the other buildings that they may have, universities, particularly in this environment. And it's what's different with the Green Deal compared to some of the initiatives that are out there at the moment is that it's a whole house approach. So we're not going in there and saying that let's just look at doing loft insulation or cavity wall. What we're doing is we're going in and looking at the whole house, seeing what energy efficiency measures that property would benefit from, and that's then got multiple technologies that might be needed to install. So again, I'll talk a little bit more about that further on in the presentation. There are still 45 measures done, but there is clearly as time elapses, technology improves, and there is a window, I think it's every 6 months, where the industry will be able to apply to get new measures put on. And obviously, as technologies develop, then other measures will drop off. But we're starting off in October with 45. And I think that the important element from our perspective when we first started looking at this was that it's been done in an accredited environment. And what we can't afford to do is to do this without that kind of rigorous attention to detail that we have through that accreditation, through our installers and through our assessors, and indeed ourselves. And if I relate what's happened in Australia, they had a similar kind of initiative about 5, 6, 7 years ago, and it went off and it started up quite nicely. The consumer bought into it, but unfortunately the measures weren't installed as well as what they could be. They didn't meet expectation. They didn't save the kind of, energy that people were hoping for. Lost consumer confidence, and the whole thing died in the water. And we can't afford that to happen here, which is why the government have been quite strict in making sure that they've imposed all these training stuff that these guys have got to go through, that the assessors, they build on the domestic energy assessor courses, and indeed from our perspective in making sure that we're in a position to manage that process in that environment. And indeed what happened in Australia, as one or two of you may be aware, they're just wrangling with the introduction of a personal carbon tax. So if we don't hit Plan A, which is Green Deal, then that will be a backstop, I think, that the government will look at if this doesn't work. So what do we do? As a Green Deal provider, we arrange the assessment of the property. We recommend the installer. We manage the creation of the Green Deal plan. We arrange the financing, and we manage the contract administration of the life cycle of that plan. Sounds fairly easy and straightforward, but I'll explain it in a little bit more detail on a couple of slides down. So if we can flick to the next slide. This is a little bit about the golden rule, which I say is the Green Deal is reliant on this for the making sure that what we've got to do here. I've got a little graph that says this is the total energy bill pre-Green Deal, and this is the energy bill post-Green Deal. So we'll save money on our fuel by installing these measures. We'll use a bit of that money to be able to pay for the repayments for the cost of installing those measures, and hopefully there'll be a little bit left where you will have some Green Deal or some golden rule saving, as we call it. So what it is what we've got to do here is make sure that the costs under the Green Deal the savings under the Green Deal will cover the costs of the installation, and that's what it's called by the golden rule. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the next slide. And what we've got to do when we're writing Green Deal plans is make sure that the length of that plan that we write is not too long, so that we're, like I said, if we're writing a Green Deal plan in a boiler for 10 years, after 5 years it blows up, then that leaves us exposed. So what we're making sure is that when we write a plan, we back-to-back the warranties with the installer, so the installer will back-to-back those with the manufacturer, so that it will ensure that the length of the Green Deal plan will be commensurate with the life of the product. Right, on to the next one, Aaron. So what will a Green Deal plan look like? I've just put 4 up here, but there could be a whole different combination. If we look at the first one, this is where everything's green, which means that the measures package, what we're going to install, passes the golden rule, and the Green Deal finance can fund the lot. And that would mean that let's think of some of the products that we might install. There are only 3 measures that actually meet the golden rule independently. One of them, as you would expect, is the loft insulation, cavity wall, and new boilers. They all meet the golden rule independently, but if you start adding on other measures that you can use these 3, if you like, to compensate for the other measures that you start adding to it. And as long as at the end of it, the total package meets the golden rule, we can fund the whole thing through the Green Deal. There will be those where we've got some households that might want some products that might not necessarily meet the golden rule, which would mean they would need to make a personal contribution. And I'm thinking specifically about you guys with solar, for instance, where Mrs. Miggins might say, actually, I quite like what you're talking about there, but I noticed next door's got a couple of panels up. Could we have some solar on ours? We can add that cost in. It would mean that it wouldn't mean the golden rule, but if they put a couple of £1,000 of their own money up into it, we could write a plan that would. So that would be an example of a personal contribution. On the next one, where we've got a property with solid wall, as we probably all aware, doing solid wall insulation is incredibly costly. It wouldn't meet the golden rule, but under certain circumstances we can get some eco contribution to it, which would mean that we could write a plan that would get those solid wall insulation done for free, basically. And then lastly, we've got those that are in super priority groups, and there's a lot of work still being done on the eligibility for eco and the criteria that eco will fulfill, starting to get firmed up as we speak, but there's still one or two fuzzy areas around the outsides. But it's not. But there are or will be opportunities for us to write plans that will be funded entirely by eco. So the golden rule is calculated against these package of measures rather than an individual product. And we've always come from it by saying that a quality assessment of the property is the key to writing a quality plan. So we've spent an awful lot of time and energy and not an inconsiderable amount of money on developing some technology that's going to help us do that. So if you can flick on to the next one, which is a nice simple chart for us all to follow. This is the Green Deal process model that we've developed. And I'd like just to talk everybody through it. But if we can just imagine on the right-hand side, that's predominantly technology. On the left-hand side is the supply chain. And if we start at the beginning, number one, the interest that's generated for a Green Deal, we as Tariga have got, as I said, a strategic partnership with Travis Perkins, and Travis Perkins have huge relationships with huge housing associations, RSLs, which gives us access into that channel. They've also got a DIY chain called Wix, which they're going to get the Green Deal branded in there. You'll see a Green Deal ambassador in the new year, and they'll probably have one of our iPads with some software running it and ask them if you'd like a pre-assessment done of your property. And there's a whole host of others, things like tonight, spending time talking to potential consumers or the industry is another way of getting the word of mouth. So there's lots of different marketing channels that will come in. And it's important from our perspective that we were able to ensure that those people that wanted to get Green Dealed, we were able to go through some kind of pre-assessment to cut down on the costs of sending an assessor out and getting there and realising the property is not Green Dealable, or the consumer wasn't really serious about it in the first place, because sending a Green Deal assessor out is not like sending somebody out that's doing a survey for a bit of loft insulation or cavity wall. These guys are very well qualified, and I'll go into what the an assessor and an installer will look like later on. But it will cost £3,000 to get to become a Green Deal assessor. So these guys are, they've got a technical skill, and they cost a lot of money to send out to do an assessment. So it was important from our perspective that we had something that would allow us to screen. We've done that. I don't think that I've got it on my iPad, but I won't be able to show it on the screen here tonight, unfortunately. I haven't brought my other lead with me. But what this does, it asks a number of questions in 5 columns just to make sure that I live in a modern property. If I fill it in, it'll come out and say I'm not green dealable. There's no point in going out and visit me. Whereas my daughter, she lives in a property that's built in 1930, and she's gagging to get a green deal, I can tell you. So it starts by us working with assessors and contractors. And what we're doing, what our model is different from most others, is that we engage with the local communities, the SMEs, which is why the relationship with Don and Mike's happened. We are building a network of installers and assessors around the UK. That ticks an awful lot of boxes. When we first presented our model to DEC back in October of last year, they were very, very keen to develop this, because what it did is it allowed the industry, without engaging with SMEs, the Green Deal was never going to work, because there isn't the capacity in the big contracting companies, and to be honest, the big contracting companies don't have all the skills there either. So it was important that we were able to have a model that engaged with the local SME market, both from an installer perspective as well as from the assessors. So that's what we're doing at the moment. We're building up this network. It's going very nicely. We've got enough to start with on the 1st of October, but we've got an awful long way to go. The country's bloody huge when you start looking at the postcodes. So we've got this network of contractors, network of assessors. We send the assessor out, assuming that Mrs. Miggins has asked for an assessment, or she's been introduced directly by an installer who wants to go and she's in there maybe doing a leaky tap or doing a rewire, and while they're there saying, would you like me to see whether your property's green dealed? Assuming that the pre-assessment works out, we can then start doing an assessment. And what the assessment does is it then recommends the measures that property would benefit from. And our particular tool then allows the assessor to take his assessor hat off and put his advisor hat on, and be able to advise the consumer, and I call the consumer Mrs. Miggins, on how she might, what a green deal plan might look like. It looks at the estimate of installing those measures. It looks at the repayment period that we might be looking at, the savings that she can make, and if she's interested in moving forward, we can then request the quotation from the installer. And assuming the installer's quotation is in line with expectation and Mrs. Miggins likes that, she can then progress. We then apply through the central charge database to get login a Green Deal ID. That then goes to the energy company, whoever she might be with, looks at the meter, sends us some important information back regarding the credit worthiness of that meter. At the same time, we send the message to the finance company, and the finance company also go through a credit process. And assuming they come back positive, we can then go and speak to Mrs. Miggins and say, yes, that's okay, we can proceed. We would then speak with the installer. Installer would contact Mrs. Miggins, do the installation. We would then do the post-installation audit. Assuming everything's okay, sign it off. We would then get the invoice from the installer. We pay that. Installer then pays for the materials, and the whole thing keeps going round. There are a number of other things that happen in there, but if we talk about the lodgement of the EPC with Landmark, there is 3 processes that we have to go from that. There's the EPC before the assessment starts, there's the lodgement of the measures, and then there's the EPC when the measures are being completed, which will basically take the property from a rating of X to a rating of Y. Obviously that's left with the consumer. And the eco brokerage there, we have to be able to communicate with the brokerage and trade carbon for those properties that might be eligible for eco, whether it be from a an earnings perspective or whether it be from a property perspective. So there's an awful lot of stuff goes on in there, and hopefully it gives you an oversight on one slide as to what how the Green Deal works. Right, if we just flip on, we talked earlier on about what the advisors have to go through. To be an advisor, to be an assessor, come on, take a seat. Then you need a mixture of technical knowledge, practical competence, and some soft skills, because you're an assessor, you need a technical skill to be able to assess the property. You're an advisor because you need to talk with Mrs. Miggins about the plan. And then you need to move into a selling phase so that you can then get the plan signed up and get the deal agreed. So these people, these assessors, advisors that we work with, to be perfectly honest, you can get some DAs that you would struggle to hold a conversation with a bloody wall. So it's a specialist skill. I build on what I said earlier on about our whole model is reliant on the quality of the assessment. If we do a really good assessment, we'll write a quality Green Deal plan. And it's in the installer's interest to make sure that plan's got as much in it as we can, and obviously has got as much saving for the homeowner as we can. And on that one, the BRE reckon that the average is going to be about £7,500. We think it'll be £5,000, so we've discounted it down to £4,000. So that gives you an idea of where we think an average plan might look. And you've got to have these various skills. I'm not going to go through those, but nobody will be able to enter into a Green Deal plan, or eco for that matter, unless they've had a Green Deal assessment of their property. Flick over now to the installer, the contractors. And again, if I just go back or build on what I said earlier on about the whole house approach, there is a bit of a revolution needed within the contracting sector, because if we're going to write these plans, there may be 3 or 4 different technologies that are required to be able to install that plan. So it's by working with people like these guys who have got multiple technologies in their gift that allows us to be able to go to that house and install the various measures. So although we are keen to engage the plumber that might just want to fit boilers for a living, the important thing is that if they want to play in Green Deal, they've got to piggyback or get to join up with subcontract their services into these guys, what we call the lead contractor or a project manager, so that they can work in the Green Deal but work as a contractor into one of these project managers or lead contractors who bring several technologies together. And again, I'm not going to go through the various accreditation processes, but it's quite rigorous, isn't it? And PAS 2030 is the basically the quality management process that these guys have to go through that allows them to manage these multiple technologies. And they have to also be Green Deal accredited for each of the technologies that they're contracting in, or they may have in-house as well. And once you've got the accreditation and you've signed the Green Deal Code of Practice, and you appear on the Green Deal Register, it allows you to use that little mark on the right, Green Deal approved. If you see any of those out and about right now, then they are not correct, because that register doesn't open until the 1st of October. So there shouldn't be anybody out there using it, but those people that do get on the register will be able to use that kite mark. So get used to seeing that. There'll be a lot of that around, a bit like Gas Safe or some of the others that you might be familiar with. Right, what's next? Yeah, I just thought I'd spend a slide here just talking about the landlord. And really, I mean, goodness me, I must have visited dozens and, well, tens, hundreds of different landlords around the UK as a result of our relationship with TP. And when I first started presenting to these guys, it very quickly dawned on everybody that it was a no-brainer, because if you are a landlord, then you, and I always make sure the FD sat next to us or in the meeting, what it does is it takes it from their P&L and balance sheet and sticks it onto the meter. So most of these large RSLs or local authorities have, you know, huge repair and maintenance and improvement budgets, and what that means is they can use that money for a slightly different way. And as I said there, it overcomes the split incentive in the rented sector, whereby it was the landlord who paid for the energy efficiency measures, but the actual tenant that benefited from it. And the Green Deal actually gets over that, and it then becomes mutually beneficial to both. And as regards who can take out a Green Deal, it can be either, but a landlord can't take a Green Deal out without the tenant agreeing, and the tenant can't take a Green Deal out without the landlord agreeing. If we just flick on to the next slide, Aaron, please. Some of you may be aware of this legislation that's coming in, but from April 2016, domestic landlords should not be able to unreasonably refuse requests from their tenants for consent to energy efficiency improvements, and where financial support, like the Green Deal or the ECO, is available. And from April 2018, all private rented properties, domestic and non-domestic, should be brought up to a energy efficiency standard rating likely to be set at E. Because this is predicated again on this golden rule, subject to there being no upfront financial costs to the landlord. So really, it's an opportunity for the rented sector to be able to get themselves ready for this legislation, and do it in a proactive fashion. Our tool, our pre-assessment tool, has been, we've put a different skin on it for various councils and RSLs, large RSLs, you know, 15, 20,000 houses in their stock, and they're using it to be proactive in communicating to their tenants, so that they can be ahead of the game, if you like, as opposed to a tenant who knocks on their door and says, what you're doing about the Green Deal. They're being proactive about it. So that's a bit about landlords. If you flick on to the next one, I just want to talk a little bit about the Green Deal Finance Company. Without any money, the whole thing doesn't work. And the Green Deal Finance Company are the body that's been put together to provide the cash to finance these measures. I've just put a little bit of an update in there. There was a loan that went from DEC to the Green Deal Finance Company, who then spent it with PwC, to develop their loan administration software. And the latest we have from them is that will be ready for January, which is good news. That was a bit earlier than what we were expecting, because we weren't expecting this to be ready till probably spring. We as a Green Deal provider, all Green Deal providers, not just Toriga, but all Green Deal providers have access to these funds. We happen to be a member of the Green Deal Finance Company, but that's because we wanted to be right in there so we understood what was going on. The Green Deal Finance Company is in the process of being capitalised, and it looks very much like the infrastructure guarantee packages that were announced by the government. It looks like the Green Deal will be one of the benefactors of that. So again, that's good news, and hopefully that can be, we expect some announcements, some press releases to come out in the next week or two, giving us more clarity as to what that time frame might be. And I mentioned there about what the current rates might be. this is just speculation, but I usually get asked, what do you think the interest rate would be? So I thought I'd stick it on there. Based on today's prices, this is what we think that the interest rate on a Green Deal finance loan will probably look like. Okay, next slide is about ECO. Now ECO, just so everybody knows what ECO is, it's an obligation that's placed on the energy companies by the government. It's a carbon saving obligation, and what the energy companies do is they convert that carbon saving into cash as to how they might be able to spend it to meet some of these energy efficiency targets and the installation of certain measures. It's huge, £1.3 billion a year for the next 3 years, 2013, 14 and 15, and the ECO has been set for the next 10 years. We don't know what the level will be post 2015, but I don't think it'll be much less than what it is now. As a matter of fact, I think it'll be more. But it's a pot of money that is going to move from being spent by the energy companies working, if you like, independently with the local authorities or with the industry directly, that will now start coming through the provider channel, so that we can then start managing that much better on behalf of the energy companies. That's our hope. Our software tool, when we're doing the assessment, when we do the recommendation of the measures to be installed, it has a carbon calculator on it, so we know how many thousands of tons of carbon that particular property will save over the next 10 years or whatever, and we can go and trade that carbon with the energy company and get paid for it to be able to subsidise those installations. And because there's a lot of people on affordable warmth and some CIC companies that are also working within the eco environment, some of the carbon savings obligation, it's quite a complex area, then we believe that the RSL, the local authorities, they will benefit enormously from the transitional period that goes through on the certain CESS programs that we all hear about. Are you guys involved in certain assessment? Or you are. So that will then provide the seamless transition from these initiatives into the eco side. And just on that one there, I just stick that in. I was at a presentation last Monday with Knarf, the solid wall and insulation people, and they showed me a graph which was unbelievable about the kind of uptake they are talking about that the energy companies will be able to fund. And at the moment, there are about 25,000 solid wall installations done a year with their product. For them to meet the targets that the energy companies have set them, it's going to have to go from 25,000, and the hockey stick went straight like that to about, well, from up to 215 up to 400,000 a year in the next 7 years. A huge, huge uptake, which they will fund. And he was on about the energy companies putting another 700 million quid into that to make it work. These energy companies throw money around like there's no tomorrow, trust me. And we need to make sure that we get our fair share of it to help support these communities. So that's a bit about eco. And I think that's probably about it for me. Is it? Yes, it is. Right. Thank you very much. Right, has anybody got any questions that they'd like to fire away with? Yeah, go on then. I knew you'd have a few.
Is it just a one shot, or can you do this more than once?
You can have several green deals on the same property for a number of reasons. If we take, for instance, an example would be solid wall. One of the channels that we see the green deal being sold is through the Wicks, and as you know, Wicks sell thousands of kitchens. They've got about 26,000 kitchens last year. So while you're having your kitchen done, you've been stripped out, you might as well get the solid wall done in the kitchen, but you might not want the rest of the house doing. So when you have your bathroom done, you might then write a plan. And the idea is that you could write a Green Deal plan for the first bit and a Green Deal plan for the second bit. And I think the other thing is that technologies change as well. And what we have now won't be the same as what it will be in 5 years' time. So, yes, you can have multiple Green Deals on a property.
Okay. As regards to the interest rates, is that a fixed interest rate? Or?
It is. It's fixed at the time of the deal. There is the opportunity as a provider for us to be able to put a variable charge onto the plan. The maximum variance is 2% per annum, and 2% per annum. So what that means is, let's say we start off at 100 quid, and we do that flat for the 10-year period. What we could do is start off at slightly less, maybe 96 quid, but it would end up at £104. So there's varying ways that we can use the repayment proposition. But the interest is, when we access the finance company and get the funds, it's fixed at that time, whatever the rate is. And it might be 7.5% this week and 8% next week. That's just the way the cookie crumbles. And we're actually in the process of raising our own bond so that we can control that ourselves.
Sorry, I forget the name you given, the chap that comes and does the survey.
The assessor?
The assessor, yeah.
The assessor, advisor, seller. It's all the same thing.
Okay. Would that just be one person, or do different people have different skill sets?
Well, I think we should elaborate and just build on that. And I mean, the model that Cousins have got, they're going to have in-house assessment capability as well as doing the installations. And that's what we call a closed environment. So they would manage the assessment process, a bit like they do at the moment for some of the CESP work that you must do, but also like a normal business proposition if you're doing solar or anything else. So they're doing the whole thing in-house. So it may require more than one visit.
One person.
Well, you can't. Two different people can't do the same assessment if that's what you're asking. No. And that there is, I certainly wouldn't want to, talk about some of the practices that have been going on with DEAs and drive-by EPCs and some of the stuff that's been happening. But our iPad, when you're going to do the assessor, it takes a picture of the assessor when it dates it and it timestamps it. When he starts the assessment and then when he's finished it, an assessor can only be in the property for 2 hours, maximum. And in that 2 hours, he's got to go and introduce himself, do the storyboards, tell him what the Green Deal's all about, do the assessment, sit down, talk through the measures, talk through the occupancy assessment, and hopefully try and do a Green Deal. So our software allows them to do that, but it may be that you can't do all that in one go and you need to come back because Mrs. Miggins needs a bit more time, and that's more cost. So only one person can do any one assessment, but you can go on multiple times.
No, I was just thinking like one guy might be sort of a gas safe qualified person, another person maybe qualified for building like cavity.
Yeah, well that's interesting. The Green Deal assessor is qualified to assess the whole property. And my partner in this, Tom, or one of my partners, Tom, he's a chartered surveyor. So he comes from at the top down, if you like, as opposed to being somebody off the street that's spending 3,000 quid bottom up. These people here, and particularly the installer network who have been involved in these technologies, will be able to do, in our opinion, a better quality assessment than somebody that's just come off the street and spent $3,000 to be an assessor. So,
finally, for any given area, might there be multiple companies that you can go to seek out a Green Deal with?
Yep.
So,
we're in competition.
You're in competition. That's what I was asking.
And these guys can sign up to as many Green Deal providers as they choose to. They're not obliged just to stay with one provider or work with one provider. I'd like to think that we can develop a relationship with our network that means that they're going to be racked out with work from us, because clearly that would be advantageous to both parties. And one of the reasons why we signed the strategic alliance with Travis Perkins is that these guys get access to competitively priced products. And there's a lot of work being done with Travis Perkins on and British Gas to see whether or not we can use some of their eco money to provide subsidies to Green Deal approved products, which will allow us to write incredibly competitive plans, and that's the idea. Okay.
If you come to sell a property,
Yeah.
you have to identify that it's been subject.
Yes, it's disclosure. There's been quite a lot of work had to be done to change the legislation, and from the Law Society perspective, now when you go through the sale process, when you go onto a landmark to get the necessary registrations, it will identify whether there's a green deal on that property. So when you do have a green deal, you have to then file that with landmark, which goes onto the land registered property. And that, just to build on that and to try and give you an insight, if you like, as to how we see that working. If you have two properties next to each other and one's on the market for 170 grand and another one's on the market that's being green dealed, if you like, it's on for 175, and you might go as a purchaser to that property and say, well, next door's at 170, yours is 175. We like yours the better because it's a warmer home, it's cheaper to heat. But if you pay a green deal loan off, we'll give you 172 for it or something like that. So we see an awful lot, we envisage where green deals will be paid off by the homeowner when they sell the property. But they don't have to. The green deal can stay with the property and it can be then transferred over to the new homeowner when they come in. And clearly in a rented situation, that's what would happen.
I'm interested in the finance structure.
Thought you might be, being a bank manager or an ex-bank manager.
The flexibility of the repayment is obviously crucial. Who's deciding on the 7.5% of the cost?
Who? It's fixed.
By who?
By the finance company.
By the finance company.
Yeah.
And what flexibility is there over the repayment term?
Well, the flexibility in the repayment is the golden rule. So we, let's assume that the cost of the measures is 5,000 quid, and we can write that over a period of 10 years to make it nice and easy, and the savings are £500 a year, then that meets the golden rule just, because 10 by 5 is 5,000, 5,000 the cost of the measures, 10 years, 500 quid. So, and the way that the Green Deal charge works, it's actually calculated by ourselves as a daily charge. So that 500 quid would be a daily charge, which then appears on the statement, the electricity bill, as, you'd get your normal so much electricity at whatever it is, 50 quid, and then your Green Deal plan so many days at £1.50 or whatever it might be, X. So yeah, I presented at spoke at a seminar a while ago, and there's a bank manager in there, and he was a bit, he was taking it a bit too far, but about some of the practices that may go on. We are a facilitator of finance. We're not the provider of finance. The provider of the finance is the Green Deal Energy Company. We as a provider have to have a credit license, which we've got, category A and category C, just for your information, which allows us to broker our own money as well as other people's money, and we are bound by their rulings. And just on that one, to just build on what you were asking earlier on about some of the legislative changes, the Credit Act had to be changed to allow early repayment without any penalty for that particular reason.
Sorry to display any ignorance, would that be including the interest that would have been paid over the full term? Or?
There's what?
I mean, if there's so much interest over...
No, there's no penalty.
That's the penalty, right, okay.
So if the plan was, let's say the plan was £5,000 and you've made 1 year's repayment of 500 quid, it's £4,500 you pay back. There is no discount for early settlement, simply there's no penalty for early settlement. It is what it is. You look as though you want to ask something.
No.
No, you're all right.
Can I just elaborate on what you said as well?
Yeah.
The idea is that, from what Gary said, from the landlord's point of view as well, is that there are no upfront costs for yourselves, little or no upfront costs for yourselves, as long as we fit within that golden rule. The repayment won't be any more than what the cost of them or the measures can save. So if the measure saves you £50 per month, that would be the maximum amount of the Green Deal payment. So it will never be more.
Including
Yeah, it's all, I mean, the way that the Green Deal plan is written is a combination of the costs of the installation, the interest required to pay for the loan for that cost. It includes, the assessment fee or any other costs that might be incurred in writing the plan, and it also includes the fee for ourselves for managing the process. So all that's wrapped together, and assuming that comes to £5,000, then that's a total thing, not, it's a total charge. And from a landlord's perspective, you've got to remember this is actually on the tenant's bill as opposed to, your bill. You are, as a landlord, you have to sign the agreement, and you are the default bill payer. Obviously, if the tenant is still in the property, then they're responsible for it. But if the tenancy comes up or it expires, then that moves on to your responsibility as a void. And I'm not quite sure there's any RSLs in tonight, but a lot of the ones that we're dealing with are using their voids. Are going to use their voids as for the Green Deal. There's one that's got about 12 or 13,000 properties, and they've got about 700 or 800 circling around at any one time, and they're going to Green Deal those void properties so that when they re-let them, they're nice and cosy and refurbed, if you like. Because it's like I said, it's a bit of a no-brainer if you think about it. And I don't know if there's anybody here in the non-domestic sector. That's exactly that's even a more attractive proposition, which we could elaborate on. Massive. The non-domestic sector is going to have it's a lot smaller. You saw my figures earlier on, 2 million. But the value of the installation will be much higher, and the savings, the LED lights, for instance, pay for themselves in about 2 years, or something like that. So you'll be able to write plans quite easily. Anything else that you'd like me to build on?
Well, there is a lot of landlords, a lot of tenants moving in the super priority group.
Yes, absolutely. And any of those that want to work with us, that's the royal us, then obviously these guys get access to our tools now, so they'll be able to do pre-assessments with the eco-eligibility and then use the software and identify which of those properties might be eco-eligible. And we can then start negotiating with the energy companies to get some eco-contribution, and those that are in the super priority groups will get plans written for nothing, really. And I don't know whether you saw or heard Radio 4. I was on the way back from dropping my kids off at school last night, and British Gas, who can't give this money away, have now extended the free loft and insulation which was for people on benefits or over 70. It's now anybody. You can be a bloody gazillionaire and have energy efficiency done by British Gas, as long as you get it done by the end of November, for free. And one of the reasons why they've put the eco through our channel, through the provider channel, is because they can't give it away. So they've got to do something different, because if they don't spend it, do you know what happens? They get fined. So they pay hundreds of millions of quid because they can't spend the bloody stuff, and they pay it in fines. So let's hope that we're a bit more successful in managing that for them. So yeah, absolutely spot on, mate. The eco for, and it's because it's meant for those people that have got an affordable warmth benefit, then you can get eco through private rented. Okay. Has everybody gone out from here a bit more knowledgeable? Good. Well, I've achieved my objective then. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for your attention, and thanks, Gary. Thanks once again for your presentation. Very informative. Anybody that has any interest at all, if you want to just fill in the little form that was on the seat in front of you, name and address, email details, we can send you the slides and tonight's presentation. So there'll be a link that you can watch it as a DVD. And if you want any further information on either Green Deal or Eco, or you've got properties that you'd like us to look at, just give us a call. It will start from October the 1st, with installations probably going ahead sometime in January. And I'm sure you'll find it probably financially beneficial to yourselves as landlords. But anybody can drive this. It can either be driven by your tenant, it can be driven by the homeowner, or it can be driven by the landlord. Or, as Gary correctly pointed out, if any of you are in a trade and you go to a property and you see that the property might need other maintenance, or you think that it might be Green Dealable, by all means come and give us a call and we'll try and look after it for you. Okay, thanks very much. Help yourselves a tea and coffee. Any questions, we're here, we'll answer it. I'm sure we'll have the answers for you. Thanks again for your time.